Hi, welcome back to the VQ workbook. We're on lesson 19. Agenda, morning agenda. Your agenda is your outline of things to be done. So if you have a schedule of things to do, usually at a meeting, you walk into a meeting and they'll hand you an agenda that tells you what things will be covered. So it's any kind of list of things to do. You can, of course, make up your personal agenda for your daily activities. There is another definition of an ideological plan. So we can talk about the political agenda or the Trump agenda. This means what that politician wants to do politically, kind of his plans that he wants to put into action over a certain period of time. There is also something called Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030. These are plans implemented by the United Nations. They make it sound really great. Agenda 21 was for the 21st century, so it's the 21. 2030, Agenda 2030 is the plan that they revised recently, and now this is the goal that they have set forth for the year 2030. On the surface, it looks really great, but there are a lot of problems with this, and I can't really get into it right now, but you might look into it. Just go to YouTube and search for it and check out what it's all about. Cajole, cajoled into doing all the work. So in the definition, you see the words coax and wheedle, and that probably didn't help you very much because you might not know what these words are either. They mean pretty much the same thing. It means that you're persuading someone to do something, but with flattery. So you're not forcing them to do it, but you're kind of tricking them into do it with your words. You sweet talk them into doing something. So it could be to deceive with soothing words, basically. So the image here we have is, you might recognize it, a scene from Tom Sawyer, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain, right? A famous story where in the beginning of the story there's this scene of Tom, who has to paint a fence as part of his chores, and he tells these friends how much fun he's having, and he tricks them into giving him an apple so that they would get the opportunity to have this fun instead of him. So he kind of tricks them into doing all the work. So it might not be exactly cajoling them, like sweet talking them into it, but he does deceive them, and it is kind of in that vicinity of the similar definition. Despot, despotic ruler. A despot is the person. He's a tyrant or a harsh person as a despotic. Basically, a bad ruler with absolute power. So when we think of that kind of person, we think of Kim Jong Un in North Korea generally, because he's the only one, a dictator of these days that we get to see a lot of on in the news. Here are some other words that we commonly use. We call these people tyrants or dictator. Those words you might be familiar with. Also, autocrat is another word. Autocratic, we would learn later. Authoritarian, as in authoritarian government. I don't think we covered that yet, but that is a word we will study. And also totalitarian. If you read a book like 1984 or what else? Animal Farm, all these dystopian novels, or even Hunger Games, you would see that they have a totalitarian government where the government controls everything. And they are, if there is one person who rules, you call that person the despot or the despotic ruler. Enigma. He's an enigma. An enigma is a puzzle or a mystery. So it could be something or someone that is hard to understand. He's an enigma is something that we hear commonly people say. It means that you're talking about somebody and that person is very eccentric, is very weird. So you say, hey, he's an enigma. We're not going to understand him. Here's a sample sentence. How the pyramids were built is an enigma. It's a big puzzle how that happened. So at this time, it's the idea is a puzzle. Gregarious, gregarious partygoers. Gregarious means very sociable. You're friendly, you like to be with other people, so you go to parties. So all people at the party goers are probably very gregarious people. The root here is important. Greg is herd. That one you do need to memorize. Greg is a herd, so if you are gregarious, you like to be in a herd of people. The root Greg is used in a lot of other common words like congregation, which means come together in a herd. A church congregation is that kind of group. Segregation, we talk about the segregation between the blacks and the whites during the civil rights era and previous to it. That is the segregation, that means to separate them into two separate herds. Also, aggregate is another word we'll study later. It means when you take the total of something, like you talk about the aggregate supply or the aggregate demand of the society as a whole. You're looking at the entire thing as one herd. Or egregious. We talk about an egregious error. That is something that sticks out of the herd. You have a herd of white sheep, but one black sheep sticks out. Well, that's something that's very noticeable. So an egregious error is that kind. So these are all words that you do need to become familiar with very soon, and they're all based on the root Greg. Inherent characteristics. The inherent parts are the firmly established parts, established by nature or habit. And so usually it means that you're kind of born with it. These are characters that is natural to who you are and what you are. So it is the essential or natural characteristic, such as wood. Wood floats in water by definition or by the nature of what it is. That's an inherent characteristics of wood. We might say that man is inherently evil by nature. We're born with it. Or man is inherently good. This is something that people argue about. Mundane. Talk about mundane matters. Mundane matters are worldly things as opposed to spiritual things. So nothing of the spiritual philosophical realm, but of the worldly things that we see every day before us. The root is interesting. You don't have to memorize this one. It is mundus, which is the world. And if you speak Spanish, it is el mundo. El mundo is the world. And I can only refer to Spanish because that's the only one I learned in high school. But if you studied any other language, other romantic languages, you would probably find that the world is probably similar to that. Because we're talking about things of the world, it often means things that are very boring and ordinary. So if you're watching a movie and the characters come out and they talk about what they had for breakfast and how they're going to go to school and what homework they had, these are very mundane matters, very trivial daily things, and that's not really what you paid a lot of money to go see, right? So we don't want to see mundane matters. We want to see superheroes fighting aliens and stuff because that certainly is not mundane. Pretentious. Pretentious teacher. Nothing against teachers, but teachers tend to be somewhat like this at times. They might seem this way. Ostentatious or pompous. It means kind of being snobbish, and you can think of it as the word pretending. So the pretentious person is pretending to be superior to you. And I talk about teachers being this way, like arrogant or pretentious. It's just that kind of image because teachers are always dealing with children and they're always in the position of explaining things to them. And by nature of that activity, over the years, they tend to become kind of arrogant as if they know everything and they're always in the position of explaining to others. So if you are an adult and you meet a teacher, you probably find that they want to explain things to you still, even though you're not a student of theirs. And so that's kind of what makes them pretentious. The other part of the pretending part is teachers might come and talk about, because they're talking about their experiences, they might talk about the trips they had to Asia, to Europe, the wonderful things they've done, and what kind of great experiences they had. And when they do that, it could sound a little pretentious, snobbish, because they're trying to make themselves sound really good, sophisticated, so on. So we can talk about pretentious language that people use, which is kind of snobbish in the way they talk. They're going to use a lot of big words at you, so you might not understand them. You might talk about pretentious houses, where the house is very ostentatious, meaning very showy. On the outside, it's glitzy, it looks really fancy. Then we can call it a pretentious house. Rhetorical skills in speech. Rhetorical refers to something to do with effective communication. It is anything to do with the way you talk and how you deliver your message. So in elementary school, you probably learned about rhetorical questions. These are questions that are not meant to be answered. So questions that are made for effect, but you're not trying to get an answer out of anybody. So you're often starting your essays with questions, rhetorical questions like, would you like to be a millionaire? Of course, everybody wants to be a millionaire, so you don't expect an answer to that. The rhetorical question, if you're like in high school and you're using rhetorical questions, not really recommended, because kids start doing that in elementary school, so it kind of makes you sound childish if you start that way. Unless you have a really good question. I'm sure there are professional writers who would do that, but they wouldn't ask some, silly question like, "Would you like to be a millionaire?" The better example for a rhetorical question would be, "What the heck is wrong with you?" All right. If your mom or dad ever says that to you, they're not really asking you to answer the question. They're trying to say that you got a problem. The other part of rhetorical is the art of speaking or writing effectively. And so that's the art of rhetoric. That's the noun form. Threadbare. Threadbare sweater. Threadbare sweater is shabby and poor. Basically, it's so worn that the threads are coming loose. So if you hear about a threadbare sweater, the idea that is that it's very old. It implies that you are very poor, or perhaps you are very miserly, like the miserly old man we studied, or maybe you're a very frugal person, like the frugal gourmet, saves money, doesn't want to buy new clothes, then your clothes are going to be threadbare. Also, wearing threadbare clothing can be described with the word threadbare, as in, he took in threadbare relatives. That means he was a wealthy man and he took in the relatives into his house, and the relatives were all kind of wearing shabby clothes because they were poor. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next lesson.